When I was 14, I lived with my mom, dad, two brothers, and my sister in a quiet rural town in Florida. Looking back, there's a lot I miss about living there. The wide skies, the warm evenings, but one thing I don't miss at all was the rain. It felt like it rained every other day, heavy enough to drum against the windows and flood the ditches, sometimes rolling in with storms that would rattle the house to its bones. It was on one of those stormy Saturday nights that this happened. Thunder was cracking so loud it felt like the walls themselves were trembling with each strike, rattling the glass in the windows and making the lights flicker. My sister was out at a friend's place that night, so it was just me and my two brothers stuck inside with nothing to do. We decided to kill time the best way we could, by playing video games. It was only 8 o'clock anyway, too early to even think about sleep with a storm like that shaking the roof. I remember the exact game we were playing on the old PS2, though the name slips my mind now. It was some weird half-broken game where all the WWE wrestlers were driving around in cartoonish cars, shooting at each other like some bizarre mashup of wrestling and a twisted racing game. It sounds ridiculous, but we loved it, shouting over the storm, trying to take each other down on the screen while lightning flickered outside, turning the living room windows into pale white flashes. And then it happened. I was just about to take out my brother in the game, finger tightening on the button, when the room went black, completely, suffocatingly dark. The TV snapped off with a soft pop, and the hum of the console died, leaving us in the sudden roar of rain and distant thunder. For a moment, the only light was from the flicker of lightning spilling in through the windows, briefly illuminating the surprised looks on our faces. A split second later, a loud pop echoed from somewhere outside, sharp and metallic, cutting through the storm. We all froze, glancing at each other in the darkness, hearts thumping in that quiet between thunderclaps. We figured a fuse must have blown out on one of the power lines down the road, something the storm had knocked loose again. But sitting there, with the storm pressing in on every side of the house, it felt like the darkness itself was alive, listening, as we waited for the lights to come back on. We went to call for Dad, but he was already by the door, pulling on his rain jacket, the fabric crinkling loudly in the quiet, getting ready to step out into the storm to check the fuse boxes. Our house had two of them, one mounted outside, attached to the old telephone pole in the front yard, and another inside, down near the laundry room. Dad turned to me and asked if I could come outside with him to hold the flashlight steady while he worked. I hesitated, glancing out the front window where sheets of rain were slamming down, bouncing off the porch and turning the yard into glistening puddles. But I nodded anyway and followed him out, the storm wind slapping cold against my face as soon as we opened the door. The rain was relentless, hammering against the hood of Dad's jacket and splashing against my arms as I held the flashlight out in front of me, the beam slicing through the downpour in a pale, trembling column of light. Dad pulled open the fuse box, the metal creaking, and began flicking at the different switches, his face tense as he worked, hoping that one of them would bring the lights back on. Water dripped from the edge of his hood, pattering onto the muddy ground by his boots. He tried every single switch, waiting between each flick, but the power didn't come back on. He let out a low breath, frustrated, and turned to me, telling me to stay there and keep flicking the switches while he went inside to check the indoor fuse box. The moment he stepped back toward the house, the storm seemed to press in harder, rain slashing sideways as the wind picked up, making the trees at the edge of the yard sway and creak. I stood there, the flashlight heavy in my wet hand, pointing it into the fuse box as instructed, though I kept glancing nervously toward the house, wishing I could just run back inside to warmth and light. And then, even with the pounding rain drumming against the ground and the roar of wind in the trees, I heard it, a sharp, heavy crack, like a giant log snapping in half, coming from the woods behind our house. The sound made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, my breath catching as I turned slowly, lifting the flashlight toward the tree line, rain dripping down my forehead and into my eyes. For just the briefest moment, no longer than a blink, the beam of the flashlight caught something. It was shaped like an arm, pale and thin, reaching out from behind one of the trees, the hand curling against the bark like it was trying to steady itself. The instant the light hit it, the arm jerked back, disappearing behind the tree so quickly it almost felt like it hadn't been there at all. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Without thinking, I slammed the fuse box shut, the metallic clang sharp in the storm, and turned, sprinting up the patio steps, water splashing under my shoes. I burst back into the house, the door slamming shut behind me, shutting out the storm, but not the thundering fear that was still racing through me. I ran straight to my dad, who was crouched down in the hallway closet, flipping switches on the indoor fuse box, the small click of each one sounding sharp in the dark. I was breathing hard, trying to get the words out, telling him what I'd seen outside, the arm reaching from behind the tree. But he just looked at me, raising his eyebrows, and let out a short, amused breath. He entertained my claim, nodding like he was listening, but I could tell he wasn't taking it seriously, chalking it up to storm jitters or my imagination running wild in the dark. Still, he put on his rain jacket again and followed me outside, around to the back of the house where I lifted the flashlight and pointed it toward the trees, right at the exact spot where I had seen the arm. The beam of light cut through the heavy rain, the raindrops glittering in its path before disappearing into the darkness of the tree line. Dad took the flashlight from me, his expression hard to read in the shifting shadows, and then, without a word, he started walking toward the woods. I stood there on the back patio, the darkness pressing in around me, the rain splattering against the wooden boards and dripping down from the edge of the roof, watching as Dad's figure got smaller and smaller as he moved deeper into the trees. The flashlight bobbed with each step he took, the light getting dimmer, until, eventually, it was gone, swallowed up by the woods completely. A nervous knot twisted in my stomach as I stood alone, the storm loud in my ears, the wind pushing cold rain against my skin. I couldn't see him anymore, couldn't even catch a glimpse of the light, and the longer I stood there, the more the dark seemed to hum around me, alive with the sounds of the storm. My hands felt cold and clammy, and my heart started to pound again as I found myself inching closer to the tree line, calling out for my dad, my voice shaking every time it left my mouth. I called again, and before I even realized it, I was stepping off the patio and into the trees, the wet grass brushing against my ankles as I pushed forward. The sound of the rain on the leaves above was so loud it was like standing under a waterfall, the heavy drops smacking against the branches, masking every other sound. I could barely hear my own breathing, but then, cutting through the roar of the rain, I heard it. Footsteps, slow and heavy, not too far away, moving over the wet leaves. I froze, straining to listen, my eyes darting between the dark trunks of the trees, trying to find the source of the sound. Swallowing hard, I called out for my dad again, my voice cracking. And then I heard him. He answered me, calling back with a calm, "I'm here." But the sound of his voice came from a completely different direction than the footsteps I had just heard. A jolt of fear shot through me, making my legs feel weak. The footsteps and my dad's voice were coming from two separate places, and for a split second, I felt like something cold had reached into my chest and grabbed hold of my heart. Panic took over, and I turned, running in the direction of my dad's voice, the rain stinging against my face, tree branches whipping against my arms as I pushed through. Eventually, I found him, soaked and walking back toward the house, the flashlight beam swinging with each step he took. I was out of breath, panting as I tried to tell him about the footsteps I had heard, coming from the other direction, but the words tumbled out, half swallowed by the wind and the rain. He looked at me, eyes narrowing for a second, before he told me to go back inside, that he would keep looking around a bit longer, just to be sure. So I turned and ran back, slipping a little on the wet grass before scrambling up onto the patio and pushing open the door. Once inside, I locked it immediately, the bolt sliding home with a loud clack that somehow made me feel a little safer. My brothers and my mom were waiting by the back door, their faces pale in the glow of a single candle, all of us watching the dark woods through the rain-blurred glass, expecting to see Dad step out at any second. Minutes dragged by, the storm pounding against the house, each gust of wind making the windows shudder, until we suddenly heard someone at the front door, the handle rattling as they tried to open it, finding it locked. My stomach dropped, and I glanced at my mom, who was already moving toward the door. But just as I stepped forward to follow, she shot out an arm, stopping me, and slowly pressed her eye to the peephole. The scream that tore from her a moment later was sharp and raw, echoing through the house and making my brothers jump. She yanked me back from the door, her face white as she ushered all of us away, telling us to go upstairs, her voice shaking with fear. And it was at that exact moment that the back door swung open, the wind blowing rain in across the floor, and Dad stepped inside, dripping wet, his eyes going wide as he saw the fear on all of our faces. I didn't see the rest of what happened, but I heard it. I heard my dad's voice, loud and furious, echoing from outside, cutting through the rain and the distant rumble of thunder as he yelled at someone. There was a sharp, angry edge to his words, something I'd never heard from him before, and it made the hair on my arms stand up. My brothers and I stood frozen on the stairs, clutching the railing, listening as the storm swallowed up the sounds outside. When Dad finally came back in, slamming the door shut behind him, rain dripping from his jacket and pooling onto the floor, his face was tight, eyes hard in the dim light. He told us, his voice low and tense, that he had seen someone actually running into the woods, their shape just a shadow slipping between the trees. The way he said it, the way his jaw clenched, I knew he was taking it seriously now. Whatever he had seen out there, it was real. We all thought that would be the end of it. We thought that whoever it was had run off into the storm for good, scared away by the shouting and the rain. But the next morning proved us wrong. The storm had passed by then, leaving the world outside washed clean under a gray, heavy sky. But inside, the house felt different. Still, almost like it was holding its breath. We went down to the basement to check for any water leaks, and that was when we found it. The small basement window, tucked near the ground, had been smashed, shards of glass glittering on the concrete outside and littering the carpet inside. Muddy footprints tracked across the basement floor, smudges of wet dirt staining the carpet in uneven, dark shapes that led from the window inward. Each step was clear, the toes and heel prints perfectly pressed into the damp fibers. It took a moment for the shock to wear off enough for us to see what else was missing. The large wad of cash Dad had been keeping on the basement bar, meant for bills and emergencies, was gone, along with a few antique decorations, small but valuable pieces that had been sitting on shelves, now empty and gathering dust where they once stood. But the part that truly chilled me, the part that made me feel like the floor was falling away beneath me, was when we followed the muddy footprints further. They led up the basement stairs, each step smeared with dirt, going all the way to the top, and then they just stopped. Our basement door, the one at the top of those stairs, had a heavy-duty lock, one that clanked shut with a solid finality whenever we closed it for the night. Looking at it now, I realized that might have been the only thing that stopped whoever broke in from coming any further, from opening that door, stepping quietly into the house, and exploring the rest of it. Exploring our bedrooms. It's been a rough couple of nights out here in the Midwest. One minute we're under flood warnings, and the next those are replaced with thunderstorm watches. Then the thunderstorm watches turn into tornado warnings. And just when you think it can't get more surreal, the sirens start up, adding their eerie wail to the already tense nights. I used to love a good thunderstorm. There was something comforting about it, honestly. You'd grab an extra pillow, maybe a blanket, get yourself settled on the couch, and just watch the sky light up, letting the sound of rain and thunder become your lullaby. There was a beauty in it, seeing lightning split the sky, illuminating the clouds and the silhouettes of houses and tree lines for just a moment before the darkness swallowed everything back up. Then the thunder would follow, sometimes a few seconds later, shaking the window frames and sending a strange electric tingle through your body. Nature was powerful, and it was breathtaking to watch it put on a show. That was how I felt, until tonight. The forecast had promised a late-night thunderstorm, so I wasn't expecting anything unusual. I figured I had some time to finish up my episode of Orange is the New Black before the show outside began, so I stayed planted on the couch, headphones on, lost in the noise of the episode while the world outside got ready to put on its display. But around midnight, I noticed flashes coming from outside, light spilling through the gaps in the curtains and across the walls. At first, I didn't think much of it. A storm was coming, after all. But something about the timing of it made me pause, a prickle of unease starting to crawl up the back of my neck. I pulled off my headphones, letting them fall around my neck, and that's when I realized why the flashes seemed so off. It wasn't the brightness, though the light was sharp and white, cutting through the darkness in quick, sudden bursts that lit up the room for a split second at a time. No, it was the silence that followed. There was no thunder. Usually, even if the lightning was high up in the clouds or miles away, you'd hear something, even if it was just a low rumble rolling in after the flash. But these flashes seemed so close, so near, that they lit up every corner of the room. And yet, the silence after each one was heavy, pressing down on the house like a held breath. It felt wrong. And as I sat there on the couch, my unfinished episode paused on the screen, The next flash washed the room in light again, and I couldn't help but feel that the night was holding something back, hiding something in the spaces between those silent bursts of light. I decided to check the sky from the kitchen window. We have these two large glass panels there, giving a wide-angle view of the yard and the stretch of land beyond, perfect for watching storms roll in. I didn't want to ruin my eyes' adjustment to the dark, so I left the lights off, moving through the house in near pitch black, relying on the familiar feel of the walls and the furniture brushing against my fingertips as I moved. The darkness outside was moonless, thick and heavy against the glass, pressing in so hard that even though I was safe behind the walls of my house, a creeping unease worked its way under my skin. There's something about that kind of darkness that makes you feel like the walls around you could vanish at any moment, that the darkness outside might swallow you up, leaving nothing between you and whatever is out there. But I kept telling myself it was just a feeling, nothing more. Just that primal fear that surfaces when your eyes can't find a horizon, when your ears are searching for sounds that aren't there. If it wasn't for the glass, the darkness outside and the darkness inside would have felt exactly the same, like I was standing in nothing, suspended in that void, the thin illusion of safety peeling away with every breath I took. And then, in that darkness, I lifted my eyes, expecting to see storm clouds rolling in, ready to crack open with thunder and lightning. But there weren't any. The sky was clear, stars glinting down like cold, distant eyes, scattered across the blackness, unmoving, uncaring. There were no clouds, no storm, no lightning. No, there wasn't supposed to be. But then, as I stood there, pressed close to the window, another flash came, bright, sudden, swallowing up the darkness in a single sharp burst of white light. And in that instant, right on the other side of the glass, I saw it. Someone was standing there, no more than 5 feet away from me. And between us, there was nothing but that thin sheet of glass. In 2009, I spent a weekend at my uncle's ranch while my parents were busy renovating the new house we had just bought. It was my second night there, a Saturday, and it just so happened to fall during one of the biggest thunderstorms of the year. I'm not exaggerating when I say there were at least 3 crashes of thunder and lightning every minute, shaking the ground, the walls and the windows in a constant, pulsing rhythm. We were right in the heart of it too, because the thunder would crack so quickly after the lightning that the flashes and booms blended together, turning the storm into a constant rolling growl that pressed against the house from all sides. I've always enjoyed storms, even as a kid. There was something comforting about laying in bed, wrapped up in a blanket, listening to the wind howl and the rain pounding against the windows while flashes of lightning painted the ceiling in ghostly white for a heartbeat at a time. So I stayed up a little later that night, just enjoying the ambiance, flipping through channels on the TV while the storm raged outside. Eventually, the movie I was watching came to an end, the credits rolling as the thunder shook the windows again. I turned off the TV, the room falling into darkness, save for the pale blue flashes that occasionally lit it up when lightning split the sky. I settled deeper into the bed, pulling the blanket tighter around me, letting my eyes close as I tried to drift off to the sound of the storm. But then, as the lightning flashed again, I heard something, a sharp, metallic thud coming from outside, timed almost perfectly with the crack of thunder that followed. I opened my eyes, listening, but tried to brush it off. Storms made all sorts of noises, branches slamming into fences, pieces of loose metal getting tossed around. It was nothing, I told myself. 20 seconds later, lightning lit up the room again, and this time I heard it again. Another metallic thud. Distinct, heavy, echoing against the roar of the storm outside, and it matched the timing of the lightning perfectly. I don't mean to make this sound like one of those cliché horror stories, but my uncle, well, he's kind of a creepy guy, always has been. We were never close, not even remotely, and there was something about the way he moved around the house, quiet, heavy-footed, that just made me uneasy. So, for that reason alone, I didn't feel right waking him up, even with the strange metallic thuds outside. Instead, I tried to push the noise out of my mind, telling myself it was probably just a loose piece of metal getting knocked around by the storm winds, maybe something leaning against the shed or the fence, rattling in the gusts. But the longer I lay there, the more that knot of concern in my stomach tightened, winding itself up with every flash of lightning and every growl of thunder that shook the walls. What the hell could that sound be? When I heard it a third time, sharp and deliberate, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I finally threw off the blanket and climbed out of bed, the floor cold against my feet as I padded over to the window of the guest bedroom. The rain was coming down so hard that it streaked across the glass, blurring everything beyond into dark smears of shapes and shadows that moved with the wind. It made it almost impossible to see the fields outside, the darkness swallowing up the landscape completely. A flash of lightning ripped across the sky, lighting up the entire property for a single white-hot second, and I scanned the fields desperately, trying to catch sight of whatever was out there. But there was nothing, just the empty, rain-soaked land glistening under the light before fading back into darkness. And then, just as the thunder rolled in, another metallic thud sounded, so close this time that it felt like it came from just below the window, tucked into a blind spot I couldn't see from where I was standing. My heart was pounding, each beat loud in my ears, but I knew what I was about to do, and I knew my uncle wouldn't be happy about it. He was the kind of man who liked things neat, controlled, and quiet, and what I was about to do would break all of that. It was going to get messy. But I had to know what that sound was. I reached for the window lock, unhooking it with a soft click, and slowly slid the window up. Immediately, the wind of the storm shoved its way inside, cold and wild, carrying drops of rain that splattered against my face and arms, dotting the floor and the window frame. The air smelled like wet earth and ozone, sharp and clean, as I leaned out, squinting into the darkness, trying to see what was out there. I stuck my head out the window, the cold wind rushing against my face, carrying the sting of rain that splattered across my cheeks and hair. I turned to the left, squinting through the sheets of rain, trying to pierce the darkness that wrapped around the property like a heavy, wet blanket. And at that exact moment, lightning ripped across the sky again, flooding the world outside in a stark, electric white. That was when I saw him. A person, dressed head to toe in black, crouched low by the outside basement door, the rain soaking him as he leaned in close to the lock. His hand was raised in the air, frozen for that brief moment the lightning held the world still. And in that single shocking flash, I saw what the noise had been. He was bashing at the basement door lock. And then, just as quickly as it had come, the light disappeared, leaving only the darkness and the pounding of rain. But the image of that man, caught in the act, was burned into my mind. I jerked my head back inside, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and quietly, carefully slid the window down until it clicked shut. My hands were shaking as I locked it, making sure it was secure, every creak of the frame sounding painfully loud against the backdrop of the storm. Panic clawed at me, every hair on my body standing on end. Had he seen me? Had he heard me? I didn't know, and the fear of that unknown made it hard to breathe. I turned and ran back to the bed, diving under the covers, forcing myself to face away from the window as I tried to steady my breathing, forcing my eyes shut. I squeezed them tight, hoping, praying that if he had seen me, he would think I was asleep, that he would just leave. Lightning flashed again, lighting up the room, but this time there was no metallic thud that followed. My heart sank. The silence after the lightning was worse than the sound had been, a heavy, pressing quiet that made me feel like something was waiting just outside, listening, deciding what to do next. I stayed frozen under the covers, barely breathing, every muscle tight as I listened to the storm, counting the seconds between each lightning strike, waiting for the sound of that metal thud to return. But it didn't. After what felt like forever, 3, maybe 4 more crashes of lightning with no accompanying thuds, I let myself breathe, just a little, telling myself that maybe, just maybe, it was safe now, safe enough to go tell my uncle. I turned over in bed, finally allowing myself to face the window, and that was when I saw it. There was a figure, clear as day, standing right there at the window, looking in at me. For a split second, the darkness between us felt paper thin, and the way the figure just stood there, unmoving, staring, made something inside me snap. I screamed, the sound tearing out of me, raw and terrified, echoing in the room, louder than the storm outside. I didn't stop to see if it moved. I didn't look back. I just screamed again and bolted out of the room, feet slamming against the floor as I ran straight to my uncle's bedroom, the fear propelling me faster than I thought I could move. My uncle didn't hesitate. He grabbed his hunting rifle, clutching it in his large hands as he burst out of his room, wearing nothing but his pajamas, no socks, no shoes, not even caring about the cold, wet ground outside. He flew out the back door into the storm, the rain immediately soaking him, his rifle held ready as he ran around the property, yelling like a madman into the night, his voice mixing with the thunder as he shouted threats into the darkness. But he didn't find anyone. The storm eventually passed, and morning light brought with it a quiet, heavy relief. It was only then that we were able to see the damage more clearly in the daylight. The marks on the basement door lock were deep, harsh dents gouged into the metal where the intruder had been trying to bash it open. It was close, so close to giving way. According to my uncle, maybe 3 or 4 more good hits would have been enough to break it open completely. He told me that, and for the first time since I'd arrived, he looked at me with something like pride in his eyes. He told me he was glad I had picked up on the sounds, that I had noticed something was wrong, that I hadn't just ignored it. Luckily, I was leaving that same day. My parents came to pick me up, and I was more than ready to go, leaving the ranch and the memory of that night behind. Since then, my uncle hasn't told us about any other incidents, and I think he's been okay out there, though we don't really talk to him much at all. He keeps to himself, and we let him. But I'm grateful that I stayed up a little later that night, finishing that movie while the storm raged on, because it meant I was awake, listening, and watching when it mattered. And in the end, I might have stopped a robbery, or something much worse.